From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. New year, new laws. As happens every year, there are hundreds of new laws that take effect with the turning of the calendar. Now, not all of them directly affect most of our lives. There's one that allows the Southeast Joliet Sanitary District to be dissolved. I'm sure we were all very eagerly waiting for that one. But with this in mind, we're going to highlight several laws that you might see playing out in your everyday life. Joining us now to talk about some of these is Ben Howell, a graduate assistant, reporter, and newscaster at WGLT, the public radio station in Bloomington Normal. Ben, welcome to the 21st show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
We tape this conversation ahead of time in order to make schedules meet, so no calls for this part of the show, but you can let us know what you thought. Our email address is talk@21stshow.org. All right, Ben, why don't we go through a number of topic areas, I guess, and we can start with criminal justice and law enforcement. What are some of the top pieces of legislation, or I guess they're laws now, that you're following there?
Of course, those were, I think, a number of the biggest ones. Crime was really popular. One of the ones that stood out, especially getting traction on some social media, was the Safe Gun Storage Act, a Second Amendment related law. That one states that gun owners must store their firearms safely if they know or that they should have known that either a minor, an at-risk person, or someone who's not allowed to have access to that gun could access them. And they had unsafe storage fines that could result anywhere from as little as $500 to $10,000, depending on what happens as a result. There were a number of other ones, especially for victims of abuse or of sexual assault. There was expanded protections for the Crime Victims Bill of Rights. That was a large one. Essentially, there used to have some statute of limitations on certain laws, and that's removed now. That's gone for prosecuting these crimes of involuntary servitude, human trafficking, other related offenses, particularly when victims were under 18 at the time of the crime, especially because if someone had happened to face that at that time, what may come of it legally may not happen until after the statute. And just another
it's
one.
Interesting. They've done things like that in the past for people who might have been victims of abuse by priests, as one example, or something like that, where they've expanded the statute of limitations. Because some people, I guess, don't really sort of come to grips with what happened to them as children until later in life.
Absolutely, and I think that was a direct, at least one primary reason to come of it, focusing on this under 18 aspect, is you're dealing with a lot at that time already. Unfortunately, if you have to be at the other end of one of these crimes, it's really hard for people to come forward with that. There was another one for abuse. There was a House bill that had taken care of law enforcement not discouraging them to stop someone from filing a police report of any kind of abuse, sexual assault, or neglect, and it really clarifies their rights as well as far as court hearings, 7-day notice of proceedings, and things along those lines as well.
So just to be clear about that, so a police officer, I guess, can no longer say, you know what, do you really want to file a report here? I mean, is that the idea behind this?
Yes, that is the idea, essentially, for whatever reason, without speculating, that if an officer may not feel the same way about something as someone who says they're a victim of the crime, people might not often file police reports because this authority figure may have said, well, are you sure? Or perhaps, is this really what you want to go down with it? And that can impose a lot of psychological and realistic problems on that person. So it forbids and stops police from, or any law enforcement officers from discouraging or actively trying to stop the report.
One of the other ones I thought was interesting on the list of bills that became law this year involved waiting periods for missing persons reports. I think, there have been a number of real life cases, and certainly anyone who's watched any, sort of police investigation show has seen the case where somebody goes to report someone missing and the officers are like, oh, you got to wait X amount of time before you can file that. That's no longer possible here, yeah?
Yes, exactly. That one was also interesting. It was a part of the Missing Persons Identification Act. And just like you said, it abolishes prior waiting periods that were required before making a missing persons report. So I know in my house, there's usually some dateline going on. If someone goes on and says, this person, let's say my spouse, for instance, is missing, and an officer or a law enforcement agent might say, all right, well, we have a waiting period. That's 24 or 48 hours, a full 2 days that you haven't seen or heard, or anyone hasn't seen or heard from this person. That's no more. It modifies other actions as well required of law enforcement once a report is filed that was especially pertinent to people. So the agency must obtain a biological sample 30 days after the date of the missing case from a closely related family member. It used to be within 30 days, now it's 30 days after. It also requires an agency to notify people responsible of the missing party's welfare about other specified reports to locate a missing person. And then as well, if they're missing longer than 30 days, the agency needs to make additional reports through NAM US, I believe it's called, but it's a national missing persons case. So just like you said as well, we used to have this 24 or 48 hours, and that's no more to file a missing persons report.
And then there was one about prohibiting employers from going after employees who use company equipment to document crimes. What is that about?
Yeah, it essentially said that employees covered under the act, and it's an amendment to the Victims Economic Security and Safety Act, so just an amendment to that one, that if for whatever reason someone has company equipment, and this extends to photos, to videos, to sounds, to other digital documents, whatever it may be, if someone has used a company equipment to document that attack, the employer cannot punish them, go after them in any way for having done that. And that expands to domestic, sexual, gender violence, or any other crime. So, really, any other crime, if you have a work computer or a camera or a phone and you record a conversation going on, the employer cannot punish you for that. And then, also, an important part of it was that if they have documented the act, so let's say you have a video of something going on, and for instance, it's a company phone, the employer must grant you access to that phone whenever it may be needed for an investigation or court or so on. So not only can you not be punished for having done that, you must be granted access to it when you need it.
All right, let me remind listeners if you're just joining us, this is the 21st show. We're talking about some of the new laws that took effect at the start of this year. Not all of them are the type of thing that will directly affect all of us individually every day, but some of them will. And we're talking about this with Ben Howell, graduate assistant with WGLT, Bloomington Normal's public radio station. There's a couple I'm just going to mention in passing. We don't have to go deep on these, but I thought they were interesting. You know those little plastic single-use shampoo bottles you get in hotels? Those are gone. A lot of hotels had already moved away from those and gone with the sort of pump attached to the wall of the shower. Well, that's now the law throughout Illinois, regardless of the size of hotel. There was another one for people in central Illinois living who get their water from the Mahomet Aquifer. Carbon sequestration near an EPA-designated sole source aquifer is now banned. And finally, there is a law that requires libraries to maintain supplies of the opioid overdose medication, naloxone, or something like that. We're not taking calls for this part of the show because we taped it ahead of time, but you can let us know what you thought. Talk at 21stshow.org. All right, let's move into education, schools, and citizenship has been a big topic in the last year, obviously. What is the Safe Schools for All Act looking to do there?
Of course, just like you said, it's gotten a lot of attention federally. Immigration has, and the Safe School for All Act is a law that prohibits public schools from denying or free public education to any children based on their actual or their perceived citizenship or immigration status. So, especially when I was talking to Illinois Legal Aid Online, asking for elaboration on some of these during my initial interview, that one is one that's come up just like they agreed, with a lot of tension with federal enforcement and federal laws, but also it requires schools to come up with by summer, this summer as well, with a set of processes for dealing with law enforcement when they have requests to enter the building. So that's something we've seen coverage of nationally, regionally, as well as sometimes immigration and customs enforcement or other immigration forces, sometimes talking about or being at or near schools. And really, it has schools need to come up with a process for how they're going to deal with this. And then also for releasing particular student immigration that may include immigration status, they need to have a process for that by the summer as well.
There was another education related law about mental health screenings. What's happening there?
Yes, that starts with the 2027 to 2028 school year, so a little far ahead, but it gives schools plenty of time to offer mental health screenings to students grades 3 through 12. They must give this screening once a year, and it's going to be a self-assessment. Really, schools could have, if they did have a mental health screening, in a number of different ways, but whatever it may be, cast it aside. This is a self-assessment, so it could be a set of questionnaires. How do you feel 1 through 5? A set of open-ended questions, and then the students will fill those out, report them back to teachers or the appropriate part of the school, and then the school can determine any follow-up as needed. So again, that starts the 2027 school year, and it's grades 3 through senior in high school. Got to give it at least once a year.
Well, while we're on the subject of health and healthcare, we can turn to physical health. And one of the other laws that took effect has to do with nursing mothers in the workplace. What's that about?
Of course, yeah. It amends the Nursing Mothers in the Workplace Act, and it might be one of those laws that paying attention to, you might have thought, how is this not a thing before? But it requires the law to provide paid break time for nursing employees to express breast milk, as the law says. So essentially, nurse for their kids. And really, it just came from, I think, a number of things, but especially an important part of that is the paid break time. So people who are giving out, who are needing to nurse, may have had trouble with trying to fit it into their schedule, trying to make sure that they are able to still take care of their work at the same time, not provide tension at work. And really, especially when you listen to some of the public discourse of people talking about it as well, it's not exactly the most comfortable thing to deal with. It's a bodily function and just got some push to really give this paid break time.
Another health related law is deals with brand name drugs and generics and insurance companies. What's happening there?
This one was especially interesting to me in prior discussion, and it amends the accident and health article of the Illinois Insurance Code. And to start out, it just requires insurers to cover the cost of a brand name prescription drug if the generic brand is unavailable at a pharmacy. And that could be because it's out of stock. It could be because dosage cannot be adjusted. And as any pharmacist may or doctor may tell you, that dosage can be incredibly important. And really, people, rather than having to go to a pharmacy and possibly leave without a drug that could either be life-saving or it could be incredibly important to their comfort, the insurer has to cover the cost of this brand name drug. It also clearly defines what an eligible prescription drug is and what a generic drug is. So maybe instead of getting a different drug, whatever it is, it really clearly defines what you're able to leave a pharmacy with. And for example, if you have a prescription for sertraline and you can't get sertraline from your pharmacy, then you can leave with your prescription for the brand name Zoloft, or we know acetaminophen versus Tylenol, whatever it may be, you're able to swap that out if the generic is unavailable without cost to the insured.
All right, just about a minute and a half left. What about this law? It's Senate Bill 618. It doesn't really fit into any of the other categories, but it has to do with alcoholic beverages, and I'm sure that's of interest to a lot of people.
Of course, and I think more people might know or take better to the name Cocktails to Go. It makes Cocktails to Go permanent in the state. So, an era of the COVID pandemic when restaurants and distilleries were having to shut down, they were able to send out their pre-made custom drinks as cocktails to go. that people could take home. And really, that COVID era law that was supposed to end, I believe, around 2028, it's permanent now. So it guarantees delivery of those alcoholic beverages. I know here in Normal we have Distill, we have Keg Grove location. So really, any of these distilleries can still continue to self-distribute their products. It also creates a new Class 3 craft distiller license. And also those restaurants or distilleries are able to offer rewards programs as well for buying that alcohol. And it's all contained within specific gallon specifications per year of how many spirits they can distribute. But really, for most people, I think the big bang is cocktails to go or permanent.
Yeah, a lot of detail there. I was starting to get that little emoji with the spiral eyes, but I think you summed it up nicely at the end. All right, Ben Howell with WGLT in Bloomington Normal Public Radio. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
More to come after a short break. This is the 21st show. Stay with us.
Support for the 21st show comes from the Des Moines Art Center, located in Iowa's capital city, featuring works by regional, national, and international artists of the 20th and 21st centuries. Details are at DesMoinesArtCenter.org.